To look at the Paris Peace Conference and terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the toll of World War I on the world had been great, and now a peace treaty was to be signed to end the war. How do you think the peace treaty would impact Germany? Now, let's take a look at this cartoon to understand more about the impact of the peace treaty on Germany. Now, we can see that Germany over here is being held tightly by the various victors in the war, such as France, America, Italy, all right, and of course the British Empire. Okay, now, and you have on the right hand side the big four who are holding on to a spoon which has a pill labeled peace terms. Now over here, each one of them is saying you've got to swallow it whether you like it or not. So the implication here is Germany is being made to swallow the terms of the treaty, which may likely to be very unpleasant for it, just like how a pill would taste bitter. All right, Germany is being forced to swallow the peace terms, which may not be very palatable to it. Now, clearly you can see that Germany does not have a say and is being forced to accept the terms of the treaty. Let's take a step back and take a look at what exactly was the reason behind this peace treaty. All right. Now, the aim of the treaty was actually to reach a settlement that would legally and officially end World War I, as the armistice was only an agreement to stop fighting. All right. And the purpose of the treaty was actually to decide on the terms of the treaties and that had to be imposed on the nations that had been defeated in the war, namely Austria-Hungary, Germany, and their allies. Now, at that time, public sentiments of the Allies in 1919 was not favorable towards Germany. In part, this was due to the fact that Germany itself, just a year ago, had imposed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on Russia. Okay, so let's take a look at what were the terms that the Germans imposed on Russia to find out, to understand how public sentiments of the Allies in 1919 would have been towards Germany. All right, so Germany basically forced Russia to sign the treaty in March 1918, and under the terms of this treaty, Russia was forced to give up large areas of prime agricultural land, industrial areas, and coal mines to Germany. In fact, Russia lost a third of its population and resources, such as oil and iron stores, to Germany as a result of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Now, that was not all. Germany also had to pay 6 billion marks in reparations to Germany. Now, you can see that Germany had not imposed a very light term on Russia. In fact, it was a very harsh term that was imposed on Russia. So given this sort of a background, all right, it was very clear that the public at the time who knew about this were not going to be lenient towards Germany. They were also going to demand a harsh term to be imposed on Germany. All right. So in a sense, we can kind of like guess that the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk would influence the public sentiments when it came to the peace treaty that was going to be imposed on Germany. So let's take a quick look at some of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and this was something that was reached only after 6 months of discussions. All right. The one on top, as you can see, is the War Guilt Clause, followed by reparations, some territorial changes, armed forces, and the League of Nations. Now, the War Guilt Clause is something that the Germans had to accept. This was a term that forced Germany to accept complete blame for starting World War I. All right, it had to accept all responsibility for causing whatever losses and damages that the Allies incurred in World War I. All right. The argument was that German aggression had caused much death and destruction, and therefore it was deserving of accepting the War Guilt Clause. All right. Now, Germany also had to pay reparations, much the way the Germans had extracted reparations from the Russians. The Allies now extracted reparations from uh, the Germans as well. Now, if you look at the amount, Germany had to pay 6.6 billion pounds as reparations to the Allies for war damages. Germany also had to give up some valuable territories to its neighboring countries. All right, one of it was actually Eupen and Malmedy. These were territories belonging to Germany that was given up to Belgium. Okay. Um, Alsace-Lorraine, if you can see that region colored in yellow, it formerly belonged to France, but when the Franco-Prussian War took place in 1871, France was defeated and it had to give up Alsace-Lorraine to the Germans. So in World War One, you find that France will be claiming Alsace-Lorraine back. All right, it was its territory and it wanted this territory back from the Germans. Okay, now Star Coalfield, if you see this tiny piece of area over here, it's actually an area rich in coal fields, and these were given to France for 15 years for them to exploit the coal resources. So in a nutshell, you know that Germany lost nearly 10% of its land, and that kind of like led to about 12.5% of loss in terms of its population. Okay, I mentioned about Alsace-Lorraine. It was returned to France. Okay, but if you see this area, there's one more area over here. It's called the Polish Corridor. Now, this is actually a territory between Germany and East Prussia, and this territory was actually given up to Poland, okay, so that Poland would have access to the sea. Now, originally, if you look at this pink part, it belonged to Germany. All right, so this kind of meant that Poland will not have access to the sea. It was landlocked, surrounded by all around it was just land. It cannot have access to the sea. But with the Treaty of Versailles, this portion that belonged to Germany was given up to Poland, and that kind of meant that it could have access to the sea. But this also meant that Germany will be cut off from East Prussia, which was officially a part of German territory as well. Okay, there were other demands made upon Germany. Germany could not form an alliance with its former ally Austria. Now, in terms of its military, the military had been a source of German pride. Okay, it had the strongest army prior to the start of World War One. Now, the Allied powers felt that Germany's strength was one of the reasons that had led to a prolonged war. So, one of the demands that was made upon Germany was that it should reduce the size of its army to just 100,000 men. And the size of Navy was reduced to 15,000 men. Conscription was banned. All soldiers had to be volunteers. It was not allowed to have any armored vehicles, submarines, or aircrafts. It could only have 6 battleships. Now, the area called Rhineland is actually a region between France and Germany, and this border region was actually demilitarized. Now, what this means is that no German forces or fortifications were allowed to be on the Rhineland region. Okay? Now, of course, when the Germans heard of the terms of the treaty, they felt a lot of resentment and hatred towards it. Now, why? Let's take the war guilt clause for an example. Okay, was Germany the only nation responsible for the outbreak of World War One? Now, we know for a fact that Germany was not the only nation that had been responsible for the war. In fact, Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia after the Archduke was murdered had actually triggered the war. And the alliance system that had existed prior to the outbreak of World War One had dragged all other nations into the war, as they were honor bound or duty bound to actually keep their word to support their allies in times of emergency. So, given the fact that all countries had entered the war determined to defeat their enemies, the Germans felt that it was really unfair that only Germany was made accountable for starting the war and being responsible for the war. Right? So there was a lot of resentment because it was clearly unfair to them. All right? Another point of grievance for the Germans was disarmament. German army was a source of German pride. Now we know for a fact that Germany had the strongest army in Europe before the start of World War One. All right, and after World War One came to an end, the only country that was made to disarm to this extent was actually Germany. I mean, to have only 100,000 soldiers to defend a country so huge, it seemed as though Germany was actually left um, to be vulnerable for any sorts of external threat. All right, it was not able to defend it itself effectively against any other nations. And it was also unfair that no other country had been disarmed to the same extent, even though they were just as responsible for participating in the war. All right. The reparations were another sore point for the Germans because it actually impoverished Germany. Germany already had huge debts. Now we need to understand and remember that Germany had entered the war in 1914 and it had been fighting until 1918. We're talking about 4 long years of war. And during this period in time, whatever resources that Germany had would have been invested into the war efforts. All right, trade would have been non-existent owing to the fact that the countries were at war, and its economy would rightfully be very badly affected by the war that was going on. Now, it needed whatever resources that was left in order to rebuild itself now that the war had ended. But these reparations meant that Germany would not be able to rebuild itself soon enough, and its people would continue to suffer immense hardship, all right, even after the war had ended. Okay? The loss of German territories was, of course, a huge blow to German pride because now you have thousands of Germans who would be living under the rule of foreign leaders who may not treat its people very well. All right? So, how did this term of the Treaty of Versailles actually impact Germany? Now, in the short term, the people felt that the government that signed the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, this government was actually the democratic government that replaced the Kaiser. All right? Now, it had signed the treaty in order to bring peace to its people, but unfortunately, the people felt that it was by signing the treaty, the government had actually stabbed the people in the back. Now, why was this so? Because the war narrative had been that Germany was not losing the war. All right, throughout the 4 years, the people had been fed the tale that they were doing well in the war. They would eventually overcome whatever challenges and defeat their enemies, and victory was nearly there. So, hearing this news that they had to sign this treaty made them feel that the government had actually hung hung them out to dry by signing the terms of the treaty. Like, you did something when we could have actually won the war. All right. So there was a lot of resentment against the government that signed the treaty, the democratic government that signed the treaty. Now, midterm impact was that Germany faced a lot of political and economic crisis throughout the period of post-war period. All right. You can see that in 1923, Belgium and France actually invaded the Ruhr industrial region in Germany. Okay, now this is because Germany had actually defaulted on its payment. It could not pay the reparations due to these two nations, France and Belgium. Now, France and Belgium troops marched into the Ruhr region and they took what they needed in terms of raw materials and goods when Germany delayed its payment. Now, the workers, of course, went on strike and to protest against this. But unfortunately, the civilians were killed by the French forces that were there. All right. So this was really humiliating for Germany because Germany could not even seek any kind of redress because this was legal. All right. What France and Belgium did to step into German territory and take what they want was made legal by the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. All right, and this was very humiliating for Germany. All right, German economy was badly affected as the German government, the Weimar government tried uh, very hard to pay the reparations. It began to print the German currency, the German marks. But this only made the German currency worthless. It kind of like led to depreciation of the value of the currency. Now, this meant that the value of necessity shot up as the money became worthless. All right, whatever savings that the German citizens had was wiped out overnight because money became worthless, and people were basically facing immense economic hardship and poverty. Many were unemployed, many could not put food on the table, they suffered great hardship because they didn't even have a roof over their heads, all right, owing to the economic situation in Germany. And rightfully, many of them felt resentment towards the government at the time because it was that government that had signed the terms of the treaty that had put it in a very difficult situation. All right, so they blamed the government for whatever instability and hardship that they had to undergo. Now, in the long term, of course, it became a festering point for Germans. They hated and blamed the terms of the treaty for all the problems that they experienced. They grew resentful of the government for signing the treaty. They felt that the government was so weak and incompetent as it was not able to solve their problems. All right, and of course, the idea of the government stabbing the people in the back came to the forefront once more. All right, and this feeling was later exploited by Adolf Hitler as he tried to win the support of the people. All right, now we can see that Germany endured a lot of hardship as a result of the terms of the treaty. Now, we have one of the questions that always surface when we talk about the terms of the Treaty of Versailles was whether the terms of the treaty were really too harsh on Germany. All right. Remember, as students of history, we need to look at both sides of a coin. We can't just take an extreme standpoint. We need to look at it in terms of how it was harsh on Germany, why it was not harsh on Germany. All right. We have to look at both sides of the picture. And some of the arguments that we can actually pose for the argument that it was too harsh on Germany, we could say it was because of the War Guilt Clause, because it was the only country that was held responsible for the outbreak of World War One. The entire blame was pinned on Germany alone, when the reality was that all other nations were equally as responsible. All right. So in that aspect, perhaps the Treaty of Versailles was indeed harsh on Germany. All right. Furthermore, it needed to pay reparations when the country was already undergoing a huge economic hardship. All right, and the Allies insisted on repayments. They were marching into the country, and they were taking what they wanted without any considerations for the German or the German people, and their actions was already crippling the already weak German economy. So in that sense, it could be deemed as being too harsh. Now, if I were to look at the other side of the coin and try to think of why the term of the treaty may not have been too harsh on Germany, now it could be owing to the fact that most of World War One was fought in France and Belgium. Really, these two nations had taken the toll, the brunt of the war. Okay, the war had taken a toll on them. All right, the war had caused widespread civilian casualties, and the destruction of crucial infrastructure was massive. All right, there was massive destruction of infrastructure. Okay, because Germany was responsible for this destruction, it was only right that it had to pay a price for it. Okay. The terms of the treaty were meant that Germany would never pose a threat to the security of Europe again. So Germany had invaded France in 1870, And 1914, Germans felt that the security could only be ensured if Germany was punished severely, so that it would never consider threatening the safety of France or any other nations for that matter.